Hi, this is Monique. I serve as a part-time spokesperson for Nehemiah Reset. Today I want to talk to you about the book of Romans. Romans is the longest and most systematically reasoned of Paul's letters. Paul announces its theme in 1:16-17, the gospel is God's power for salvation, because it shows us that the righteousness of God is through faith for all who believe. Paul explains the need for justification through faith because of sin, 1:16-4:25. He then spells out the results of justification by faith in terms of both present experience and future hope, 5:18:39. In the next 3 chapters, he expresses his sorrow that many of his fellow Israelites have not embraced the gospel, and he wrestles with the theological implications of this, chapters 9-11. He concludes by describing how the gospel should affect one's everyday life, chapters 12-16. Paul wrote his letter to Rome about AD 57. In his letter to the Roman Church, Paul lays out his argument for unifying Jews and non-Jews in Christ, and in the process, instructs his readers on how to restore their relationship with God. As Paul explains, we only find unity with God and with one another through God's Son, Jesus. Christ represents the fulfillment of God's covenant promises, going all the way back to Abraham. Paul proclaims that Christ is the very righteousness of God and the means for us sinners to become righteous, to be saved. The book of Romans dates to the end of Paul's third missionary journey. He most likely wrote this letter from the Greek city of Corinth in the mid-50s AD, Acts 19 verse 21, 20:3. Gaius, whom Paul mentions as his host, Romans 16 verse 23, is likely the same Gaius mentioned as a resident of Corinth in another of Paul's letters, 1 Corinthians 1 verse 14. Paul had not met the Christians at Rome, Romans 1 verse 13, but the circumstances he mentions in the letter provide clues about his reasons for writing. Paul wanted to take the gospel to Spain, and he thought that Rome might make a good launching point for a westward mission, 15:22-24. Much like Antioch had been his home base in the East. In addition, Paul deeply desired to promote unity between believers in Jesus who were Jewish and those who were not Jewish, called Gentiles or Greeks, see, for example, 1:16. The Roman Church probably was a mix of Jews and Gentiles. Paul wanted to communicate to these Christians that the gospel includes everyone. Romans is structured as an ancient letter, with an opening, 1:1:17, a body, 1:18-15:13, and a closing, 15:14-16:27. The 2 main parts of the letter's body include a section focusing on what God has done in Christ, 1:18-11:36, and a section instructing Christians how to live the truths set forth in the first part, 12:1-15:13. In the first section, Paul's discussion focuses on 4 major points. First, everyone, including Jews and Gentiles, is under God's judgment, 1:18-3:20. Second, Christ has become the living revelation of God's righteousness, so that everyone who believes, both Jews and Gentiles, can be made right and brought into God's family, 3:21-5:21. Third, God's righteousness gives us hope in our battle against sin, 6:1-8:39. Finally, despite many Jews' rejection of Christ, the people of Israel nevertheless have a role to play in God's redemption of the world, 9:1-11:36. In the section on Christian ethics, Paul aims to help the Roman believers put their faith into practice, particularly when it comes to living together as the diverse yet unified church, 12:1-15:13. For Paul, Christians ought to have their entire lives, in terms of both belief and action, centered first and foremost on Christ. The good news of Jesus' saving act is meant to be transformative, and this good news should be unapologetically proclaimed. Romans can be divided into 6 different areas. These areas are as follows. 1. The Gospel and God's righteous judgment, 1:1-3:20. 2. The gift of God's righteousness, 3:21-5:21. 3. The power of God's righteousness, 6:1-8:39. 4. God's righteousness toward Israel, 9:1-11:36. 5. Righteousness in relationships, 12:1-15:13. 6. Paul's ministry and personal greetings, 1514–1627. Romans' major themes, righteousness and salvation, ring forth most clearly in Romans 1 verses 16–17, Paul's declaration of the power of the gospel. Here, Paul proclaims that the good news of Jesus opens God's salvation to Jews and Gentiles alike. Further, this salvation fulfills the Old Testament promises God made to the people of Israel, showing God's faithfulness to his covenant. Paul shows us that in Jesus we clearly see God's power to save all who believe. In Christ, our righteous God unites Jews and Gentiles alike into one people of God. All cultures, races, and people can come to God for salvation. Christ's righteousness is enough for any and all of us to be saved. Paul explains that all sinned and face the consequence of death, 3:23, 5:12, 6:23. But God has provided the salvation we need through the death and resurrection of his Son, 6:5:11, 8:1:4, and nothing can separate us from his love, 8:38-39. Despite our wrongdoings against God and other people, Jesus saves each of us who believe. While our sin previously stood in the way, Jesus makes a way for us to have a relationship with God again. Jesus makes a way for us to be unified in his name. We are empowered to collectively and boldly proclaim, and live, the good news of Jesus. I hope this gives you a quick summary of the book of Romans and the key ideas contained therein. To learn more about other books of the Bible, visit our website at nehemiahreset.org or our rumble.com channel. If you want to support us, like this video and subscribe to our weekly newsletter detailing our recent videos by subscribing at nehemiahreset.org/email. Thanks for watching and have a great day.
Hi, this is Daniel again. The previous video was sponsored by Nehemiah Reset, a 501c3 Bible-believing organization. Our mission is to assist Christians in developing a stronger biblical worldview as it pertains to relevant cultural and biblical issues. We seek to inform Christ followers, equip them, and mobilize them into action to vote their biblical values and to actively engage in our culture locally and at the national level. We are committed to help Christians and non-believers to develop a better biblical worldview. Nehemiah Reset produces videos and ebooks to assist believers and explorers in developing a biblical worldview when it comes to cultural and biblical issues. We produce videos on key topics like public school indoctrination, the woke agenda, sex education, equity and inclusion, climate change, immigration, religious freedom, and lessons that can be learned from key subjects in the Bible. To learn more about Nehemiah Reset or to watch our latest videos, go to our website at nehemiahreset.org or our rumble.com channel. We produce new videos every week. To get a free weekly list of our latest videos, sign up for our weekly newsletter by signing up at nehemiahreset.org/email. You can support our website by liking our videos, subscribing to our channel, or providing donations to help us advertise for new subscribers. Thanks for your help in growing God's kingdom and bringing more people to Christ. Thank you for your support and help. Have a great day.